So to bring the trilogy home, we have to let Adam talk, because this third text, the Apocalypse of Adam, isn't framed like a public sermon. It isn't Adam standing on a mountain with a crowd, it's Adam speaking privately to Seth, like he's handing down something that's not safe to say out loud. And that detail sets the tone. This isn't performative, it's intimate. It reads like a father telling his son, "Here's what I learned the hard way, and here's what they'll never admit." Now, if you've never heard of this book, here's the quick anchor. It's one of the Nag Hammadi texts, writings that didn't make it into the official Bible. And the reason it matters for our trilogy is simple. Part 1, Apocryphon of John, gave the blueprint a higher source beyond the Creator, a lower ruler running the visible world, and humanity carrying a light the rulers can't originate. Part 2, Hypostasis of the Archons, showed the enforcement layer, deception, coercion, impersonation, and the way awakening gets treated like a threat. Now Part 3 gives the human experience of it. Not the system talking about itself, not the rulers explaining their rules. Adam describes what it felt like to go from glory to survival, from knowing to forgetting. And Adam begins in a way that already sounds different than the version most people were raised on. He says, "When God had created me out of the earth, along with Eve, I went about with her in a glory." He says that glory came from the eon from which we had come forth. So in Genesis, Adam is dust plus breath. In Adam's Gnostic telling, there's still dust, but there's also a sense of origin that predates the garden, a belonging that comes from higher than the world. Then Adam says something even more direct. He says Eve taught him a word of knowledge of the eternal God. And he says, "We resembled the great eternal angels, and we were higher than the God who had created us and the powers with him." Just sit with what that implies. In mainstream biblical teaching, the knowledge moment is often framed as humanity becoming guilty, becoming ashamed, becoming disobedient. Here, Adam describes knowledge as recognition of the eternal God, and he frames the creator of their bodies as something lower than that eternal source. So it's not we became bad, it's we realized there was more. And then Adam tells you what happened to that more. He says the ruler divided us in wrath, and then the glory in our hearts left us, along with the first knowledge that breathed within us. That's one of the most important phrases in this whole text, the first knowledge that breathed within us, because it treats knowledge like a living thing, not a concept, not a fact, a presence. And when that presence withdraws, Adam describes the aftermath in one brutal sentence. He says, "We learned about dead things like men." If you've ever felt that shift, you know what he means without needing to believe in any cosmology. A person can live with a sense of meaning, presence, connection, and then lose it. And when it's gone, life collapses into survival, anxiety, decay, time, status, and fear. Dead things. Then Adam says the consequence out loud without softening it. He says, "Then we recognized the God who had created us, and we served him in fear and slavery." That line is the trilogy in miniature. The moment the glory leaves, the relationship changes. The creator becomes the authority you fear, the ruler you serve, the one you submit to like a subject. And Adam adds, "After these things, we became darkened in our hearts." If you were raised on Genesis, compare the emotional logic. Genesis says the eyes open, shame enters, they hide, and the relationship breaks. Adam's Gnostic POV says the glory withdraws, the heart darkens, and what follows is fear-based service. Now, Adam doesn't leave the story there, because the whole point of his speaking to Seth is to tell him that the system doesn't just conquer once. It keeps repeating its method, so he introduces the next turning point, messengers. Adam says he saw 3 men before me, whose likeness he couldn't recognize, because they were not the powers of the God who had created us. That is an important distinction in Adam's voice. There are powers of the Creator, and then there are beings who don't belong to that category at all. And these 3 tell him, "Arise, Adam, from the sleep of death." That phrase, sleep of death, isn't just poetic. It's the Gnostic diagnosis of the human condition. Not only sin, but sleep. Not only guilt, but forgetfulness. And now we can connect this back to what we covered in John, because it's all one story. In the Apocryphon of John, the rulers admit they're trying to harness light through Adam. They literally say, "Let us call him Adam, a power of light for us." So when Adam says in his own testimony that the glory in our hearts left us, you can hear the same idea from the inside. The system didn't just punish behavior, it suppressed the light. Now we also mentioned the visual description of the Creator and Archons and why that matters. Adam's text is more about the human experience, but the trilogy gives you the full picture. In the Apocryphon of John, the lower ruler is described as a lion-faced serpent, and the Archons are described with beast-like faces. So when Adam says, "We were higher than the God who had created us," it's not a proud human talking down to the eternal source. It's a human distinguishing between the eternal God and the ruler of the system. And if you were taught made in God's image as a comfort, this trilogy intentionally flips that into a disturbing question. If the rulers look like beasts in these texts, then what does it mean when the rulers are the ones saying let us and shaping the human vessel? Now Adam takes it beyond Eden into history. He describes great men appearing and the rulers responding the same way they always respond, with accusation. He says, they will say to Sakla, what is the power of these men? That's not just ancient drama, that's the reflex of threatened authority. When something shows up that doesn't submit, the regime doesn't ask, is it true? It asks, how do we frame it? How do we explain it away? How do we label it dangerous? And Adam says the rulers go further. They punish the body of the one upon whom the Holy Spirit came. So the pattern completes. The light appears, the system accuses, the system punishes, and then it rewrites the story so the punishment looks justified. And that is why this book, spoken from Adam to Seth, feels like a private warning. Not be good so you don't get punished. More like be awake and understand what the system does to awake people. So let's compare this with the biblical story people know. Genesis often gets taught as humans disobeyed, became ashamed, and suffering followed. Adam's Gnostic POV sounds like humans carried glory, recognized the eternal God, and when that recognition threatened the ruler responded by darkening perception and turning humans into fear-based servants. And here's the thought that lingers after reading it. If the world punishes accurate recognition, what does that say about the world? And if a spiritual system makes you ashamed of being human and grateful to be ruled, who does that system actually serve? Because in Adam's voice, the tragedy isn't that humans were curious. The tragedy is that humans forgot what they were, and the entire battle across Eden and history is whether that remembrance returns. What if the second coming is awakening? And what if the system fears that more than anything, because once you remember, you can't be ruled the same way? John showed the blueprint, the Archons showed the tactics, Adam showed the outcome, fear and slavery. So here's the ugly possibility. What if religion, at its worst, isn't meant to connect you to God? It's meant to manage you for the God of this world? And what if Christ is the part of you that refuses the management?